great. Okay, next on our agenda is the Student of the Month. And our Student of the Month this month is from Seguin High School. If Principal Ray Borden could come down, please.
Hello. Greetings, Dr. Cavazos, President Reich, members of the board. As you know, it is very difficult to choose only one student out of so many amazing students at Seguin to bestow this honor upon. However, the student I have chosen, Gerald Hodges, is the epitome of what it means to be a well-rounded student. Academically, Gerald is literally in the top of his class. He challenges himself with all AP courses: macro, government, econ, environmental, calculus, AP English. He is a member of the National Honor Society. He is also a proud cellist and orchestra member, of which he will be rushing to an event immediately after this. And even while holding down this extremely rigorous course load, Gerald finds time to volunteer with the youth at his church. He volunteers constantly within his church as a sports manager and a leader during the sports camp. He's a youth leader, he's a game leader, he referees with his sports church. He has a strong foundation in his faith, and he uses that foundation as guidance for many of his decisions in his life. In addition to this award, Gerald has received the Rotary Award this year, and we just received notification that Gerald would also be the first person to receive the 2018 Eddie Peach Mel Scholarship Award. I'm assuming you knew that. Surprise! No.
Surprise.
No, he knew. But the achievement that has garnered the most attention for Gerald this year, including national and local media, is his accomplishment in the water. Gerald is a swimmer, but he only has been a swimmer for 4 years. He decided he wanted to swim his freshman year, so with no experience, he literally dove right in, even though he didn't know how to swim. With hard work, perseverance, grit, and determination in his senior year, Gerald led Seguin to its first ever state meet in swimming. And so this story is just too good not to tell, so I'll give you a quick little synopsis for those of you that don't know. Basically, it was a 200 relay. We were not even expected to place. Gerald was the last leg of the swim, the last 50 meters. We jumped off, and I was there talking to Coach Wiedemann, just kind of watching on the side. We jumped off, 8th place. Okay, I guess we'll finish maybe 6th. About 15 yards out, people just start going crazy. Our kids are freaking out, parents are freaking out. I look up, and this guy's in 4th place, 10 yards, 3rd place, hit the wall at 2nd place.
Wow.
Started in last place, hit the wall at 2nd place. This story embodies the essence of Gerald's spirit. He is a conqueror, he has a high level of self-efficacy, and he won't give up until he reaches his dreams. I've had several private conversations with Gerald, and what impresses me the most with Gerald is his worldview. He understands what it takes to be successful, to have tried, failed, persisted, and triumphed. The love he has for his family is evident in every conversation. He always finds a way to share a piece of wisdom he adorned from his father or mother. I am always left wanting more time with his student after we converse. I feel sometimes as if he's coaching me, as opposed to him coaching him. Gerald plans to pursue an educational degree in order to teach junior high math and coach basketball, so I look forward to hiring him soon. I am honored to present the Seguin High School Student of the Month to Gerald Hodges.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi, I'm Gerald Hodges. I think I'm supposed to introduce my family. So I'm Gerald. From left to right, that's my oldest sibling. That's Ania. She is 14. She is at South Grand Prairie Early College. She'll have her associates when she graduates. These are my twin sisters, Michaela and Melinda. They are also at, I believe it's Reagan Middle School. They do all kinds of crazy stuff. They dance, they play sports, they're awesome.
All right.
Right there is my wonderful mother, Ms. Demetrius Hodges. She is a teacher for Eisenhower Elementary School. She's a 3rd grade teacher now, the head teacher. She's the big boss on campus. She's also amazing. And then my dad couldn't make it. He's a school resource officer and a police officer for Grand Prairie. Actually, he's at a scholarship event right now, so that's the only reason he couldn't attend. He's my wisdom guy. I get all the stuff from. So, thank you so much.
Well, thank you. Gerald, you're an absolute example of what we hope every student can be and achieve in moving forward, both now and going forward. No doubt you're going to accomplish your goals. With every success, there's perhaps a lot of failures that people don't see, and it seems that at your very young age, you have already figured all that out, and you're not afraid to keep pushing that envelope. That's what it's all about. Thank you for being a great example to other students, to adults, and to your sisters. And Mom, you got to be proud. So and I know you have another event to go to, so we'll try to speed this along just a little bit. If you'd allow myself and Dr. Cavazos to come down, we have something for you.
Oh, yes, sir. Thank you. UTA. I got the presidential scholarship.
All right. I don't know how, if we need this or not, but Gerald, this is a pin. As you see, I'm wearing one. Dr. Cavazos is wearing one. Bowie's not wearing one. Don't look at Bowie. Oh, John's not wearing one. Okay. Trustees usually always wear these. Or so we wear these, and these are things that only we give out. And it's my honor to be able to present this to you. Feel free to wear it on your lapel or in any fashion, shape, form, or fashion that you choose.
Thank you so much.
And that's only things that we give out, so it's a very special thing. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
And this is a presentation also for you as a kind of memory of tonight, and we're very proud of you, and you represent our students exceptionally well. So thank you.
Well, thank you. What an incredible story. If you just had a few more yards, you'd be, right? Congratulations. Congratulations. You guys gotta be proud of your brother, huh?
Thank you so much.
That is definitely an example of more than a remarkable education right there. Incredible. All right, so moving on, item C, our outgoing Student Leadership Advisory Board, we are moving that to our next meeting. So let's continue on to administrative appointments for the principal of our Turning Point Secondary Campus.
President Rice, I'd like to recommend that the board appoint the individual discussed in closed session for principal for Turning Point Secondary.
Just go ahead.
President Rice, I can't even say the word, I'm so excited for. I would move that we accept the administrative appointment.
A second.
All right, a motion by Mr. Hibbs, a second by Mrs. Mays to approve the administrative appointment. Any discussion? Seeing none, please vote. All trustees present, vote in the affirmative. Congratulations.
President Rice and board, I'd like to introduce our new principal for Turning Point Secondary, Ms. Jeannie Muldrew. Jeannie attended the University of Texas at Arlington, received her Bachelor of Arts in Speech Communications, University of North Texas for a Master of Ed in Ed Administration. Most recently, the interim principal at Turning Point Secondary School, has been a coordinator of student behavioral support, has been an assistant principal, and an English and speech teacher. Jeannie, congratulations.
Thank you, sir. To President Reich, school board members, Dr. Cavazos, it is truly an honor. Thank you so very much for this tremendous opportunity to be named principal at Turning Point Secondary. I have some individuals that I want to introduce. My daughter, Jordan, who's here. My son, Morio, he's at home sick. So, hi, Mo. He's at home with the fever. To my sweetheart, Aaron, who also could not be here. I thank him as well. And then my best friend, my ride or die, Crystal Lyons and her daughter, Alyssa. They're here. And Dylan plays for Cedar Hill, and his team just advanced into the championship for baseball. To my whole family and crew, thank you guys. What makes this so special is 18 years ago, in May 2000, I was presented as assistant principal at Workman. So I feel that my Lord and Savior has taken me full circle. I thank my parents, may they rest in peace, for bringing me up in a way that I could be an example and a leader for others. To all of my colleagues and friends that I've worked with over these 24 years in Arlington, I thank you, especially to my student services, and I cannot look at them, I will not cry. But Dr. Turner and his wife are here. I thank you, Dr. Turner, for your leadership and guidance. I would not be standing here if it wasn't for your tutelage. Where did he go?
He's in the back.
There he is. Thank you, sir. To my student services, Belia, Angela, Anna, Angela again, Jared, Lily, Cheryl, and Eric. You're my family, and I would not be here. Thank you for listening to me cry and pushing me to be stronger and better. And then to my new team, Turning Point. I love you guys. Thank you for putting up with me this semester and teaching me and helping me to accomplish my dream. Again, thank you for this opportunity. I pray and I will work to choose to be the leader that you have designed me to be. One more thing, Mr. Hill, Dr. Wirtz, and Ms. Hollinger, you took me through a gruesome task, but I thank you. I choose to make it. Thank you.
Sincerest congratulations. So happy for you. As is our custom, if you would mind following Mr. Kale out to the front and for a brief reception so we all have the opportunity to greet you and welcome you officially. And if the audience wouldn't mind letting the board go first so that we can get back in and get back to business. We'll take a brief recess and come back at 7:35. All right, we're going to continue on this evening. Next on our agenda is a public hearing. We don't have any And then open forum for agenda items. I don't see any cards on agenda items. Is that correct, Ms. Benjamin? Okay. So we will move right into action items. The first item is the consideration of approval of teacher probationary and term contracts. Dr. Cavazos.
Thank you, President Reich, and at this time, I'd recommend the approval of the probationary contracts and term contracts for teachers as discussed.
Okay. Okay, Ms. Hudson.
Move to approve.
Okay. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion by Mrs. Hudson and second by Mr. Hibbs to approve the approval of teacher probationary and term contracts. Any discussion? Seeing none, please vote. All trustees present vote in the affirmative. Motion passes. Okay. Next, consider approval of, yes, sorry, hold on, the screen. Can we clear the screen? There we go. Thank you. Mrs. Walton.
Chairman Rice, I would like to request that I abstain on my son's contract in this list of folks. Lloyd Andrew Walton, if that could be reflected in the minutes, I would appreciate it.
Okay, very good. The minutes will be reflecting of that. Mr. Chapa? Oh, hold on. Okay, there we, gosh. Mr. Chapa?
I'd also ask that the minutes reflect that I abstained for Sarah Holder, a teacher coach at Bowie High School, for potential appearance of conflict of interest.
Very good. Very good. Ms. Benjamin, you got that? We're good? Okay. Thank you. Noted for both of you. Thank you very much. So now we will move on then to consider approval of term and probationary contracts for the administrative and professional staff. Dr. Cavazos?
Thank you, President Reich, and I'd like to recommend that the board approve the term and probationary contracts for administrative and professional staff as discussed.
Okay. Ms. Walton?
Thank you, Dr. Rush. I move to approve the term and probationary contracts for administrative and professional staff as presented.
Very good. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. Motion by Ms. Walton, second by Mr. Hibbs for approval of the term and probationary contracts for administrative and professional staff. Any discussion? Seeing none, please vote. Motion carries. All right. Next, item C, consider and take action on a resolution appointing consultants and directing staff and consultants. Oh, I'm sorry. Well, thank you. Yes, Mr. Chapa?
I'd ask that the minutes reflect that I abstained for Terry Chapa, an individual in the Student Support Services Department.
Very good. Lots of Chapas. Very good. Ms. Mays as well?
I'd like to make a motion.
Oh, okay, okay. So now we'll go back to, all right, Ms. Benjamin, you have that reflection in the minutes? Very good. Okay, so now the consideration and take action on a resolution appointing consultants and directing staff and consultants to prepare for the issuance and sales of bonds. Ms. Mays.
I move to approve the resolution appointing consultants and directing staff and consultants to prepare for the issuance and sale of bonds as presented.
Okay. Do I have a second?
Second.
Very good. A motion by Mrs. Mays, a second by Mr. Hibbs. Hibbs, to take action for the resolution appointing consultants and directing staff and consultants to prepare for the issuance and sales of bonds. Any discussion? Seeing none, please vote. Motion carries 100% in the affirmative. Thank you. All right, next, we're moving on to items to be withdrawn from the consent agenda. Any trustees have items they wish to be withdrawn from the consent agenda? Seeing none, we'll then be considering moving on to consent. The items listed on your agenda under consent. Ms. Powell?
Yes, President Rice, board members, Dr. Cavazos, good evening. There are 11 bids on the agenda this evening for your consideration, and in all cases, the administration is recommending the low bids and the bids that represent the best value to the district. There are also donations on the agenda this evening, and I have to say this is probably the largest one I've ever reported to the board. We're reporting tonight donations totaling $1,554,565, which brings our year-to-date total to $2,197,048.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Ms. Powell. Lots of community generosity, and thank you to the Jones Family Foundation for their legacy project associated with the draft at Workman Junior High. It's excellent. All right, do I have a motion to accept the consent agenda? Oh, hold on.
Second.
Okay. Sorry, Ms. Hudson. We have a motion by Mr. Hogg, a second by Mr. Hibbs. We'll just call you Mr. Second tonight. Any discussion? All right, please vote on the consent agenda. All trustees present vote in the affirmative. Consent passes. All right, now we move on to discussion items. Our only discussion item this evening is the overview of the Texas school finance system. Dr. Cavazos.
Thank you, President Rice. And this evening, we'd like to present an overview and a review of our Texas school finance system. And this is a good opportunity to calibrate on the understanding of our school finance system, as it has a lot of complexity to it. And so Ms. Powell will take us through this learning exercise. Ms. Powell.
I said earlier that this would be riveting, so I'm sure. So President Reich, board members, Dr. Cavazos, this is a good time for us to talk about school finance for several reasons. We are working hard on preparing next year's budget, and certainly the school finance system has implications for our budget. We also are preparing to meet with our legislators to educate them about the district's priorities. And then also the Public School Finance Commission that was authorized by the 85th legislature is meeting. And matter of fact, they had a meeting today, and we are following closely their work. They are charged with studying and identifying opportunities to revamp or improve the current school finance system. And so there are things occasionally in the news about that commission and about their work. And so again, this is kind of all very timely, good opportunity for us to touch on this. One thing I want to point out really before we start is a very basic premise here, that the state has not studied the true cost of public education, what it takes to educate kids in almost 30 years. And so today there really is a disconnect between the funding formulas themselves and what it really takes to educate a child. And so at this point, it has become more a system about allocating the resources that we have available in the state, or that the state legislature appropriates, more so than it is a true reflection of allocating dollars that are needed to appropriately educate children. So, all right. There are two very basic sources of income for all the school districts in Texas, property taxes and state aid. And in concept, the funding system in its entirety is supposed to be a shared funding system. However, it is not, and is anything but shared. And we'll talk more about that as we go along. But property taxes are a big part of the entire system, and of course property taxes are levied on property values, and so property values play an enormous role in the state funding system. So it's a very basic point here is that the higher property values are per student in a district, the less money we get from the state. That was supposed to be an equalizing factor when the state was first created. It's an inverse relationship. So again, the higher your values are, the less money you get from the state. The expectation being that if you have high property values, you have the means and the resources to generate dollars locally to pay the basic cost of education. So the funding formulas themselves are set in law, and then the legislature actually, through the budget process, appropriates dollars to fund those formulas. So there are two ways that the legislature can actually affect funding. One, they can actually go in and change the funding formulas. That's one kind of an action that they can take. Or they can, through the budget process, appropriate more money perhaps and increase the basic allotment that's the very core piece of all the funding formulas, and through that means change school funding. When you look at the state funding formulas, a number of different data elements go into those formulas. It's a very complex series of formulas that all come together to ultimately determine your state aid. The big things that are required in the funding formulas are listed here. They're student counts. We don't get paid for students who are enrolled. We get paid for students who attend school. So average daily attendance is a very key early basic item that goes into the funding formulas. And then also special program participation. So students participate either in gifted and talented programs, career tech, perhaps they're served through special education or through bilingual education programs. And those special programs carry some funding weights that are unique to those programs. So we capture our average daily attendance and then the average daily attendance and or full-time equivalents of students participating in these different special programs. Those go into the mix. The other big thing, prior year property values. We've already touched on that a little bit. That's really the other biggest piece that goes into the funding formulas. Our current year tax rate and our current year tax collections are also a factor here, and then the cost of education index. So the cost of education index is supposed to represent geographical differences in the cost of resources. This was first created in 1990, was when it was first adopted, and it is supposed to represent the difference in salary cost from one district to the next across the state based on different factors, whether you are a very rural district or whether you're an urban district may have an impact on what it costs you to hire a teacher. And so that cost of education index was originally based just on professional salaries. It's not even total payroll, but the cost that it takes for us to hire professional staff in our districts. It has not been updated since 1990. And this has been a big source of contention in numerous lawsuits since then. As I mentioned a minute ago, our property values have an inverse effect on our state funding. So as our property values go up, our state aid actually goes down. And the formulas actually use last year's property values. They don't use the current year, they use last year's property values. So again, this is an inverse relationship. Student counts, on the other hand, have a direct impact on state aid. So if our attendance goes up, we have more students enrolled, and thus we have a higher average daily attendance, then our state aid is going to go up. Similarly, if our average daily attendance drops, if our enrollment drops, then our state aid will drop. So that's a direct relationship. This worksheet is a summary of the summary of finance that TEA publishes for us for the 17-18 year. This is actually the template we use for the budget for this year. And I just want to show you this because it demonstrates that there are a number of different elements that ultimately make up our total state funding. So you can see listed the top over half of the slide are different program areas. Those represent the different special programs we talked about, along with regular program allotment. That's the basic piece we get for average daily attendance. You'll see that there are two blue arrows on here pointing to different rows. The first one points to the total Tier 1 allotment. Tier 1 is supposed to represent the basic cost of educating kids, okay, in all these different programs, based on formulas that were set many years ago and funding weights that were assigned to these special programs many years ago and have not been updated in as long as 30 years. So the title there, total Tier 1 allotment, is a bit misleading because it does not truly represent the actual cost of education. But in our case, for the 17-18 year, Tier 1 totaled $414.6 million. The next arrow points to a line called local share, and that's where the state recognizes the dollars of that total Tier 1 amount that they expect us to generate from our local property values and our local property taxes. And that is assessed on last year's property values, assuming a tax rate of $1. That's how the local share is calculated. So for us, for 17-18, that local share was $233.5 million. Now, you keep that Tier 1 number in mind and that local share number. I'm going to show you kind of a slide that demonstrates the difference between what is considered a property poor district and a property wealthy district. You may hear that term on occasion, property rich or property poor. All the states in Texas fall into one of two buckets, property rich, property poor. There are only about 200 districts that are categorized as the wealthy districts. Everybody else falls into that other bucket, lots of times referred to as property poor or Chapter 42, because that's the section of the education code where all the laws fall about the funding formulas. So for us, we are a property poor district. And so I'm going to demonstrate here what it looks like for us in terms of state aid compared to a wealthy district. We saw just a moment ago the slide that showed that our total Tier 1 funding for 17-18 was $414.6 million. And you'll see the line shaded in blue is our local share that we're expected to generate off of our local property values. Our property values that were used in the 17-18 state aid formulas were $23.3 billion. So this year, our Tier 1 portion, just Tier 1 portion of state aid was $181 million. Now, if we happen to have property values that were much higher than we actually have, say they were $45 billion, not $23 billion, then that local share of a dollar tax rate levied against those higher values would generate a dollar amount bigger than the total Tier 1 allotment. And so we wouldn't receive any state aid, any Tier 1 state aid. So that just kind of shows you the difference between what a state aid template might look like for a poor district, which is the vast majority of districts in the state when you talk about state aid, and a property wealthy district. And just to give you some context, the threshold for determining if you are a Chapter 41 district or property wealthy district in the state is that your property values are greater than or equal to $514,000 per student in weighted ADA. In our case, for this year, our property values per student were $307,000. So that kind of gives you some context as to where we fall on the realm of property poor to property wealthy. So again, as property values rise, it's not just a one-time snapshot, but from year to year, as our property values rise, we will receive less and less state aid. This has the effect of saving the state money in their own budget. And so, as you can imagine, across the entire state, property values generally are rising. We have property tax data going back probably 30 years or more. And in that period of time, there are only a couple of periods where values actually went down. And so the vast majority of the time, from year to year, property values rise. And we certainly are in that mode at the moment across the state, not just here. But as property values go up from one year to the next, then the way the state funding formulas work, the state doesn't have to put as much money into the formulas. And so that saves them money on their budget. They then take those dollars and use them in other places other than public ed in the budget. And that ultimately has the effect, though, of just shifting that funding burden more and more to the local property owner. So again, I'm going to demonstrate here with this next slide what happens from one year to the next as our property values go up. So for the 17-18 year, again, this is the same information we looked at a minute ago. Our total Tier 1 cost is $414.6 million. Our local share on the values, the property values used in the formulas this year, totaled $233 million. So we wound up getting $181 million in Tier 1 funds from the state this year. Next year, our property values will be going up. And remember, the state formulas use last year's property values. So the values that will show up in the 18-19 template are actually our current year values. So they went up about 8% this year. When you plug those numbers into the funding formula, if we assume that we have exactly the same student account and it counts, and this is the only thing that changes, our property values, then you can see that we will receive less money from the state next year. That's the only thing that changed, were the property values. Now, for next year, our early estimates are that our property tax revenues will go up about $11 million, and our state revenues will go down in total. This is just the Tier 1 piece that we're looking at, but in total, about $32 million. Some of that drop in state aid is because of our property values that are rising. It's also because our enrollment is decreasing a bit next year. And again, as property values go up from one year to the next, then more of that funding burden shifts to the local property owner, the local homeowner, the local businessman that owns property. This slide simply shows the progression over time of how this shared funding system has changed. So when the current system was first fully implemented in 2008, it was an even split between the state share funding and local district funding, 50-50. For the current year, that has shifted because property values have continued to go up across the state. And so currently, local districts are bearing 57% of the total cost of education, and the state share has now slipped to 43%. And the estimates are that for next year, again, property values are continuing to rise, and so that's going to continue to shift even more, so that the state will now only be funding 38% of the total cost of education, and local school districts, and i.e. local property owners, will be funding 62% of the total cost.
Ms. Powell, just a clarification on
Sure.
that. So that's the state, that's the overall average, right?
Yes.
So what does that look like for Arlington ISD? In this
I'd have to get the split. I can't tell you exactly what that is for us.
Okay,
Right off the top of
that's
my
fine.
head. Yeah.
Thanks.
It has been in not just in looking at total local revenue, total property taxes, and total state aid, which includes a couple of things beyond just the foundation school program. I believe this last year, the state portion was about 52%, and the state portion was about 47%, and the local portion was about 52%. I think is actually what it was. The other big constraining factor is the tax rate itself. The state constitution will let school districts go all the way up to $1.17, but to raise your rate even a fraction of a penny above $1.04, you have to have voter approval through a tax ratification election, or a TRE. And so today, Over 94% of all the districts in the state are either taxing at $1.04 or at a higher rate than $1.04. So the system itself is forcing everyone up. Right now, we tax at $1.04, and all the districts in the state, 49% of them are taxing at $1.04. And 45% of them have a rate above $1.04, all the way up to that $1.17. And this is a slide that the state actually produces that shows that. You can see that there are exactly 500 districts taxing at $1.04 right now, and you can see that there are 456 taxing above $1.04. There are a handful that are still taxing below. Another thing worth noting, we hear a lot about charter schools these days and charter school funding. Charter schools, since they do not have the authority to levy a tax, they do receive state aid, and the state basically pays the local share for them. And so the funding formula is a little bit different for charters, and charters get paid the average value of state aid for all school districts, including the property tax element, the local share element. And so for this year, that adjusted allotment for charters is $6,522. For Arlington ISD, it's $5,651. And so they generate over $800 more than we do, almost $900 more per student than we do. And so that's very significant, and that's something that a lot of districts have started talking about in the last year or so. We hear more about that funding disparity. So over 600 school districts sued the state. There were several different groups that formed and sued the state in 2011 over the school funding system. The district court ruled that the system was constitutional. That was in August of 2014. The state appealed that directly to the state Supreme Court. And most people expected that the state Supreme Court would rule in favor of the school districts. And that did not happen. It was quite a surprise. In May of 2016, the Texas Supreme Court ruled that the school finance system was just barely constitutional. They used the term Byzantine even, and strongly urged the legislature to address the problems with the school finance system. So what did all that mean for all of us? When the legislature did meet following that ruling, it was last spring, and they really had no mandate because of that ruling. They had no mandate to change the funding system, and likewise, they had no money. Just to be very honest, they have their own budget struggles. So keeping in mind the concept of as property values go up, our state aid goes down. As the state legislature began to prepare their budget during this last session, property value growth for this upcoming year was significant enough that it was going to save the state $3.5 billion. Now, some of that money had to be used to pay for new enrollment that was coming into the district. About 70,000 to 80,000 kids a year enroll across the state in public schools. So even after they pay for that additional enrollment, that still was going to leave the state with $1.5 billion savings, because property values grew. And so they were able to take those dollars and use them other places in the budget. So last year, as we were barely getting into the session, several of the largest school district advocacy groups came together, and largely under the leadership of the Texas School Alliance and Arlington ISD, and specifically Dr. Cavazos was the president of the Texas School Alliance last year. And we brought the other large groups together, TASB, TASA, the Equity Center, and the School Alliance. And we met and tried to identify some very core principles that we could all advocate for to the legislature. And the three that you see here is what we landed on, or are what we landed on. And that is, very simply, ask the legislature that any savings that are generated because property values grow, that the legislature take those dollars and put it back into public ed, rather than putting those dollars other places in the budget. In effect, public ed funding should stay with public ed. If we spend it on public ed one year, then they should commit those dollars to public ed again the following year. And specifically putting those dollars into the basic allotment. That's the very core piece of all the funding formulas. That's the particular element of the formulas that helps everybody, whether you are one of those property wealthy districts or whether you are a property poor district. That helps everybody. It's also more transparent in the entire process. And then thirdly, appoint a committee to examine school finance in the interim. The thought last spring was that this was too big. There were too many other things going on in the legislature, and they could not adequately address all this during the legislative session. That in fact turned out to be the case. The legislature did not approve any new funding for public ed in the session or even in the special session. They passed House Bill 21 in the first called session. It made some tweaks here and there around the edges, but very few districts across the state really benefited from that. The one thing that they did do in the first called session was to authorize the Public School Finance Commission. And the purpose that was set forth for that commission was to develop and make recommendations for improvements to the current school finance system or even identify new methods of financing public ed. And so there are 13 people on that committee, and it's important to note that who appoints people to this commission. 8 of the individuals are appointed by the governor and the lieutenant governor, who have been very vocal about supporting vouchers and caps on property tax revenues. And so 8 of the 13 people are appointed by individuals who have some priorities that maybe don't completely align with public education funding. There's also, on that committee, there is a superintendent. The superintendent from Pflugerville is on that committee. And then my counterpart from Austin ISD, Nicole Conley Johnson, is on the committee. That group has met 8 times, including they met today. Their meetings have been largely focused around the structure of the current school finance system, student demographics, a lot about desired student outcomes, as you would expect, and tax policies have been discussed at length. They have only allowed public testimony at 1 of those 8 meetings, and that was in March. The invited testimony seems to suggest that there's not an interest in putting additional funding into public ed. And again, we're members of Texas School Alliance, and we get updates through them, and then we monitor things as well. There appears that there's no real consensus among the committee members about what changes are necessary. So I think at the end of the day, I'm not sure that we all feel terribly optimistic about the likelihood of gaining additional funding through recommendations that this commission makes to the legislature. They have 3 working groups. One of them is a revenue working group, one is expenditures, and one is outcomes. The outcomes group has met once. The expenditures working group has met twice, including they met yesterday, and the revenue group has not yet met. So absent changes through the state funding system by the legislature in an upcoming session, our choices, and not just for us, but for everyone, are very limited, really. School districts find themselves more and more in a box. Their ability to generate new revenues are very constrained. If you are taxing at $1.04 or anything less than $1.17, you have that opportunity to raise your tax rate, but to do that, you have to pass a tax ratification election. Those districts that are already at $1.17 have nowhere else to go. They have no more opportunity to generate additional tax revenues. And again, there are 36% of all the school districts are already at that $1.17 maximum. Another choice that you can make is to spend fund balance. And, you know, we talk a lot about fund balance and how that's like a savings account, and once you spend it, it's gone. You can also make budget reductions, or you can do any combination of these three. But they are all hard choices, and they all have very significant implications on our budgets, and in some cases on the programs that we offer for students and that we can offer. So what does this mean for us? This chart shows a history back to the 14-15 year, comparing our budget to actual expenditures year after year. And you can see the first couple of years on that slide, we just barely had balanced budgets. The blue bars are budget. The orange bars are actual expenditures or actual bottom line at the end of the year. And so for the first 3 years, you can see that we had a significant positive variance between our budget and our actual year-end surplus or deficit. In this case, each one of them is a surplus. In the current year, we adopted a budget that the operating portion of that budget had a deficit of $18.7 million. And most recently, our projections indicate that we're going to do much better than that. We're still projecting a deficit of $2.8 million. And then the forecast that we've made earlier in the year for the next couple of years out show growing deficits, keeping in mind that those projections don't include anything for raises. We never build raises into our budget forecast. The point here is that as we tighten things up and we become more efficient in processes, there, we think, is less opportunity to overcome a budget deficit and actually end the year with a surplus. It just is getting harder and harder to overcome. And so unless there is some change in our revenue stream, then it's very likely that we are going to be facing some of those difficult choices we talked about just a couple of minutes ago. We've shared this with our Financial Futures Committee. Financial Futures Committee met last year, and over a series of meetings, we talked about everything from the school finance system. We talked about our budget specifically. We talked about enrollment trends. We talked about our strategic plan, instructional priorities. And in February, that committee came to this board and made their first report under this new structure of FFC. And they made 4 recommendations. And I've got them listed in here. The first one is that we invest in our elementary experience, and that involves a wide range of things, everything from programming to facilities, services, quality personnel, an investment in efforts, marketing efforts to manage our enrollment trends. All of these things, especially the investments in programming, require significant investments in our budget. So there again, we keep seeing how the current state funding system has direct impact on what we're able to do here. Their next recommendation was that we continue to evaluate cost effectiveness of our budget and our operations, everything from facilities to the programs we offer, our personnel, and all of our services. And we do that. Matter of fact, the next FFC meeting is the end of this month. The meeting will focus largely around efficiencies and how we look for efficiencies and demonstrating how we compare to other districts on a variety of things. The third recommendation was that we continue to provide competitive compensation for both our teaching staff and our leadership, and that we continue to invest in leadership development so that we can attract and retain very qualified staff for all of our schools. And then the last recommendation that they made was the biggest of all 4, and that is, given the circumstances around our current funding system, that we consider holding a TRE and doing a tax rate swap where we actually lower our debt service tax rate and then through a tax ratification election, raise the M&O rate that pays for all of our daily operating costs by an equal amount, so that in the end, there's no change to the total tax rate, but we are able to secure some additional funding for the general operating fund while we still maintain some flexibility in our ability to issue bonds or pay for future capital needs through the INS rate. So we also, this district is something I think that we all should be very proud of, is that we are very active in our legislative advocacy efforts. This had not always been the case, and I guess it was 5-6 years ago that we really began to engage more aggressively, more effectively with our legislators and at the state level. And so one of the things we do each year is we adopt a legislative agenda that sets forth our priorities. We have adopted an interim legislative agenda because this year we're in between legislative sessions, and the current interim legislative agenda has 4 broad priority categories, including accountability, school finance, school choice, and pre-K. And this was approved back in November, and it's posted on our website for anyone to see. In particular, on the school finance piece, we broke it down into 3 big categories, one of them being student achievement, the other qualified workforce, and finally local control. And we have a number of points. If you look at the actual agenda, you'll see there are a number of points, but you can pretty well sum them up in the bullet points we have here. As a priority, we encourage tax relief and increasing the state share of public ed funding, all things we've just talked about, increasing the basic allotment, and then updating the program weights that are used in the funding formulas to truly reflect what it takes to cost to educate children in these different special programs, and transparency in the process. It's amazing. And this is a very complicated system. It's hard to explain to people. And when you really sit down and tell them, you know, when your property tax bill goes up and you're sending dollars to us, that's not a windfall for us. We don't recognize more money because the other side of that is state aid. In the way the funding system works, when our property values go up, we get less money from the state. People just don't realize that. It works differently than the revenue systems for cities and counties where they levy a tax, all those dollars come to them and stay there. So it's very eye-opening when you really sit down and explain to people that, that look, we don't gain additional revenues in total by your property tax bills going up. So that's the transparency piece that we speak of, is being more clear to all of our citizens across the state about what the system really means and how it really works. And then certainly looking for a way to invest in our workforce itself. So again, that we attract and retain qualified people. A big piece of that is looking for greater access to affordable health care for our employees, and ensuring that the TRS system is secure for folks through their retirement. We have an opportunity next week. We've been invited to provide testimony. Mr. Hogg and Mr. Kale will be providing testimony before the House Pensions Committee next Thursday on the topic of our health insurance plan. And so we intend to share with legislators some of the challenges that we have and some suggestions for how they can better manage that plan. And then finally, local control. And specifically there, we look for relief from unfunded mandates, whether it's relieving us of the mandate itself or giving us the funds to pay for the things that cost us extra money that the state mandates that we do. In terms of our advocacy efforts, we meet at least once a year with our individual legislators and try to share this information with them and try to explain to them what the state funding system means. Again, it's very complex, and it's kind of interesting that it's, you know, our legislators come from all different walks and different kinds of professional backgrounds, and many of them don't serve on the education committees in either the Senate or the House, and may not directly work with the appropriations committees. and they don't necessarily understand how the system works. And so we work with them, trying to explain how the system works and to try to set forth for them our community's priorities, our district's priorities in terms of accountability in school finance and in school choice and pre-K. We are setting up those meetings. They will take place for this year and in the next month or so. We're scheduling those now with each one of them. We're very active with the Texas School Alliance, which is an organization of 37 of the largest school districts in the state, and that group meets monthly, and we take updates from consultants on legislative activities. One of our members, the CFO, who is my counterpart in Austin, and who serves on the Texas Public School Finance Commission, is part of this organization because Austin is a member. She has updated us twice now on the activities of the commission and gives us some good insight there. We also participate actively with the Accountability Technical Advisory Committee, or ATAC. Kevin Barlow participates on that committee, represents the district in advising TEA on the accountability system. We also are very engaged, our board members, you all are very engaged with TASB in their legislative efforts on behalf of all the school districts in the state. Again, we have a financial futures committee that has learned a lot about the school finance system and the state legislative mandates as a whole. That group is currently working on a letter to the School Finance Commission that they intend to send to the commission, file with the commission before their next meeting, which is June the 5th. They put tremendous energy and passion behind this, but it's an effort to convey from a taxpayer and a parent standpoint and teacher standpoint the desire to address the funding system problems and to generate additional revenues for school districts and to ensure a more equitable funding system, all to promote outcomes and improve student outcomes for all of our students across the state, and specifically here in Arlington. We plan to hold some public meetings this fall to just offer the School Finance 101 conversation and answer questions for people about, well, where do my taxes go, and help me understand why it is that my tax bill goes up and yet you're still up here talking about we don't have any money. We want to help explain how all this works to them. We also will look to have a session or two where we try to educate not only our legislators, but their staff members who are key to them during a session about how the school funding system works. So we'll be doing that in the fall ahead of the next legislative session. So in terms of key points, we've talked about a lot of information here, and I've tried to reduce it to bullet points, and even the bullet points became kind of a lot. On the state aid piece, again, the very basic premise, if everything else stays the same, when our property values go up, our state aid goes down. And the funding formulas themselves, the weights that are used in those formulas are grossly outdated and do not reflect the current cost to actually educate students, especially students that are in different special programs that typically bring with them incremental cost. The formulas themselves don't include any factor to adjust for inflation. And our greatest area of inflation from one year to the next is the need to give salary increases. Our payroll costs represent over 86% of our total budget. And if you think that we give a 2% raise each year or about, that's well in excess, that's almost $8 million. Cost right there, increase. And just again, to try to keep up for our employees, keep competitive with other districts and maintain and recognize inflation for our employees. On the tax rate side, we're locked in. We tax at $1.04 right now on our maintenance and operations tax rate. We can go up to $1.17, but to raise the tax rate at all from where we are right now would require a tax ratification election. And that gets hard to explain to people, again, when their tax bills are already going up, and it's hard to make them understand or help the community understand why it is that their bills are going up, but yet we don't have any more money. And again, over 94% of all the school districts are already taxing at or above that $4 limit. It's my personal opinion that the system is designed in such a way that that it will force all of us back up to $1.17, and that may be the next time that we get any real attention from the legislature on meaningful change. That happened when most of the school districts were taxing at $1.50. And the Supreme Court ruled that effectively amounted to a property tax, a statewide property tax, which is not constitutional. And then they forced the legislature to make a change to the funding system. In terms of our cost pressures, we have higher accountability standards. We had the new graduation requirements that were implemented several years ago through House Bill 5. All the way up through this last legislative session with House Bill 22 and the new accountability system. We will start seeing ratings for school districts in this August, and then following August for all school campuses. Larger populations of kids who bring with them some extra needs. English language learners, that population is growing significantly, and our population of economically disadvantaged kids continues to grow. And then certainly inflation, and we've already mentioned that there's no factor in the funding formulas for inflation. And then the legislature itself, the decisions ultimately that they will make, especially in this next session, will inform our needs for possible changes, be it through considering a TRE or use of our fund balance or budget cuts. And I should say and/or budget cuts, because it could be any combination of those three things. So what we know is that advocacy is absolutely critical. And so I'm very proud of the work that this board has done and that we do each year to communicate with our legislators. It takes more than just our delegation to affect change, and we're anxious to share the message with other citizens in our community and help folks understand how the system really does work. So with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you very much, Ms. Powell. And I think you've maintained all of our attention despite what you may have thought at the beginning of this. Let's see, we do have some lights indicating some questions. Ms. Walton.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, President Reich. I've been attending Financial Futures, and and we've talked about this in our Finance Committee. But to hear it all at one fell swoop is pretty staggering. It really is. It's just critical, and I don't know that anybody but the canaries in the well here, or the mine, really understand, what a slippery slope we're on. As I'm hearing it, without any increase anywhere in the funding, employee raises is going to have to come out of fund balance, which is never popular. Let me ask a couple of questions. In the those allotment things that the outdated allotments, I've heard that the transportation allotment is particularly antiquated. When was the last year that was adjusted or reviewed?
80s, actually. 84.
1984? I was just a young thing back then, gosh. Couldn't drive a bus, but anyway. There was some other. Well, I'm also thinking about the state that funding is in and states surrounding us, and the unrest that is happening in those states. Have you been following that? Is this a similar situation that's happening in Oklahoma or Kentucky or Arizona?
I think what we see in several other states, is a level of frustration largely over teacher pay. And I think the state of Texas, our pay for teachers is much more competitive. I don't think we will see those kinds of teacher walkouts at the moment. I know over the last several sessions, our teacher advocacy groups are very vocal, and they do a good job of trying to educate the legislators, and they actually will rally in Austin periodically throughout a session. I don't think we're looking at anything that extreme at this point.
Yeah, I know some of it is pay raises, but some of it was just because they had such little to work with as far as materials and textbooks and that sort of thing too. Staggering. That's all I have for right now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Walton. Mrs. Mays.
Thank you, President Reich. Thank you very much, Cindy. For those of us who have been around and engaged in what's been going on within the district for the last several years, this is not new information. You've actually been putting this information out. We've been talking about it, but the time now seems to be for truly educating and truly understanding the advocacy that we are going to have to all take throughout the state for public education, if that's what we truly believe in. So, Polly, I just wanted to say one thing, not making an agreement or a disagreement, but just for me, Accounting 101 principles tells me if we pull anything out of fund balance or any type of a balance where money is not continually being put in to replace, we should not take anything out, whether it's raises or anything else. It doesn't even have to be particularly raises, but anything that you cannot sustain, if you're continuing to take out, that could be a very, very slippery slope, because if you can't maintain what you've taken out for the next year, then to me that probably brings about bigger issues. So just a thought on what you said. Question on slide that says state aid. For our average daily attendance, can you just briefly, one more time, kind of summarize what that means?
Sure.
Does it mean full attendance for a day? If a child is on a field trip and doesn't report to first period, does that still count as being present and so forth?
Yes, if they're attending a school function, that counts. So if you think of it that if I'm a student and I'm enrolled and I come to school every day of the school year, so enrollment I count as one, and I come to school every day of the school year, I count as one in average daily attendance. If I miss several days, then I will count for something less than one in average daily attendance. Attendance is taken at the second class period of the day. That's the official attendance period. So if you're in class then, you're counted there all day. And students who are away on official school activities count as being present.
Yeah. There you go.
Oh, thank you. This is something you may not have, but if there was some way for us to affect the ADA in a positive way, is that a necessity? Do we know what it's running? Is it about what the best we can do, or where are we as far as that percentage?
Our attendance rate is actually a little over 95%. Yeah, and so attendance is strong. And since, with the accountability standards and requirements, it's very important that kids be in school. And I think our schools do a good job of advocating and for their kids to attend for reasons other than, obviously, than just money. Having them there is very important to everything from graduation rates to star performance. And so the schools work very hard to get their kids there. Back to the question about ADA, one thing I will mention is that our pre-K students are half day. So a pre-K child would count as one in enrollment, but is 1/2 for ADA.
And so 95% is about what it's been running for the last several years, or
It has been, yes.
it's been pretty steady? Okay, thank you very much, Liv.
There we go. Okay, so Cindy, back to the pre-K, counting one for enrollment, half for ADA. If we have 2 half-day programs, then each student, one in the morning would count for half, the one in the afternoon would count for half.
Correct,
Okay, but still count for 2 enrollments then?
yes.
Okay. Then on the slide for the AISD FSP revenue, the one that had the tier allotments, did you say you were going to come back and talk a little bit about tier 2?
And I can. Tier 2 is not affected as much by property values, and that's, the property value piece is kind of the overriding issue and problem with the school finance system. And so we wanted to focus on that. Tier 2 is an enrichment piece. We can certainly have a discussion about that, but for the pennies that we tax above $1, the state guarantees that we will generate as much money per penny of tax per student that Austin ISD generates. Austin is a very wealthy school district. And so we generate some additional dollars on tier 2. Let me go back and see that slide. We generate almost $21.8 million this year on the tier 2 portion of state aid. So it takes what we earn on those 4 pennies, because we tax $1.04. So on those 4 pennies above $1, and if you apply that against our property tax, our property values, and then divide that by the number of students and compare that to this guaranteed yield, the state makes up the difference. And so the difference in our case is $21.8 million.
Okay, that explains why you skipped over it. Okay. So,
And we can go on because there's actually, yeah, the next.
you're awesome.
Well, no. You can generate those, and it's called they're called golden pennies,
yeah.
okay? And so there are 2 more pennies, up to $1.06, where you can get that higher yield, that Austin ISD yield. So a district that chooses to have a TRE and passes a TRE, the next 2 pennies after $1.04 are, you maximize that return because you're still being paid for that higher yield. And then beyond that, between $1.06 and $1.17, the state guarantees that each penny will generate, I think it's $31.95 or something like that.
Okay. And then on the slide that says Texas School Finance System on page 5 for us, this is just a comment that it's interesting that the first bullet point says that it saves the state money. And I would venture to change that verbiage to it keeps the state from spending money on public education, because they still get to spend that money any way they choose. So I would not say a savings, but I can say that. Thank you for presenting the way it is. Then on our page 10, the slide that starts off with the 85th Texas Legislature, can you just very briefly explain what enrollment growth is? Is that enrollment for students coming outside of Texas? Is that growth from students entering school for the first time, either pre-K, kindergarten? Can you just kind of give a summary of what enrollment growth?
So, and it can be both. So students new to public ed in the state of Texas. That could be a child who moves here from out of state. It could be a child who was homeschooled or in private school since they were in kindergarten, and now they're going to come to public school for the first time. It could be that, that the birth rate has increased. We have experienced in our district a dip in enrollment, and as we've studied it, one of the things we found is that following the recession, the birth rate, not just here, but across the state, dropped. It's coming back. So as those students now are aging into school, we have more students coming into public ed than we did for several years. So it could be any number of things.
Okay.
Any child new to public ed in Texas.
Okay. And then on that same slide, in the second bullet point, can you just briefly describe what recapturing for wealthy districts means?
Sure. So, you know, we had the conversation. There's a slide. Let me go back to it. It'll be easier to see it here. Okay. So, a recapture district is a wealthy district. That is a district where their property values are, per student, are more than $514,000. And under the formulas, then they have to pay money back to the state to try to equalize them down to that $514,000.
Okay.
The state then puts those dollars into the general revenue fund, and those dollars are spread back amongst other districts and other parts of the state budget.
Okay. Okay, and then also on that same bullet, when it states that the state will have approximately 1.5 billion from the example that you used, more revenue due to rising property values. I just want to highlight how, with the rising property values, just to reiterate what you've been saying, that the state will then receive that additional funding. We do not see that
That's right.
additional
The state
funding
is the
at the school
beneficiary of
district
that.
level.
And they put it other places in the state budget.
Right. Not necessarily, once again, public education.
Certainly not public education.
Okay. Okay, and then my next question is on our page 12. Just wanted to point out for the slide that says budget implications, how you stated that 36% of our school districts are already at that $1.17, which is the max, which means that they have no additional way to earn additional revenue without
getting new students.
Right, without getting new students. But also, I think at that same thing for the school districts whose rate is under $1.17, if they were to not pass the election, since the voters would have to pay for that, they would also be in that same boat. I just wanted to verbally say that.
Correct.
And then I think that's it. Once again, I really appreciate you putting this together. I'm really anticipating and excited about what you mentioned about upcoming being able to go out and speak more to the public, make sure that we're all on the same page of understanding exactly what kind of budget implications, how these things without any change truly do impact public education. And I am personally looking forward to, whether it's in the capacity as a board member or as a parent or as a advocator for public education, of being able to get with community members and continue to really advocate for the students. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Ms. Mays. Mr. Hogg.
Thank you, Dr. Reich. Good questions, Ms. Mays. Good coverage right there. Ms. Powell, when D.R. Horton, America's home builder, Fortune 500 company, moved back to Arlington, did we see more tax revenue as a district?
You will see it in that 1 year. The following year, our state aid, those values, that new value from their building, their facilities, is input into the state funding formula, and our state aid goes down.
and then the formula catches back up, and we're back to where we are, square one. So we see a blip for year one. When Texas Live, the Texas Rangers new facility comes in, tax property value increase, do we see more revenue?
No, in that particular case, the land has been taken off the tax roll. The city has developed that. And so we have an agreement where the Rangers pay us for an estimated amount of taxes that we will lose by those properties coming off the roll, but we're not benefiting from higher values there.
And if Amazon opened headquarters too here, would we see a tax increase for the local district?
Only in that first year, and then after that, your state aid drops, and no.
I think sometimes we all see, listen, I'm protesting my property tax bill I do every single year, and I love fighting the Tarrant Appraisal District over that. But I think educating that of what's happening on funding, where it comes from, I think that's the biggest challenge we face. Ms. Powell, thank you for explaining school finance, because I've been doing this 10 years now. I've been to numerous sessions in Austin, all-day sessions put on by groups, all kinds of things to learn about school finance, and I feel like I have a pretty good knowledge on it. But you ask most people around the state, and they say there's about 10 to 20 people who truly understand everything about school finance. Would you agree?
I would agree.
Are you close to that 10 or 20? I would think you're close. I know you don't claim you are,
No.
but I think you're pretty close. And then when I hear the guys who are in that 10 or 20%, I'm pretty blown away with what they know. Ms. Walton, you asked about transportation funding. That hasn't gone up since 1984. We spend approximately a little over $10 million a year and receive approximately I think about $2.8 million back from the state, just to bus students around the district.
And that's so important because that gives them the
It
opportunity.
does.
Covers about 30%
Yeah. Ms. Powell,
cost.
with ADA and, some of our that kind of follows your poverty line a lot of times when you see socioeconomic of school attendance, some of those things. When bad weather, our numbers automatically drop down to 90-something percent, 80-something percent. When we switch to ADA minutes, what has that done to our ADA funding?
It doesn't change the way the funding works. They still treat it based on days, and they made no adjustment to the funding formulas or the way that ADA is calculated even when we went to minutes.
Is there bigger risk for us because there's fewer days and more minutes? That's where I'm getting at on this question. It's just something that popped in my brain while you were speaking.
And I don't know that I can say there's greater risk. There are some provisions in the law, and we actually used one this year, and we've used them before, where if we have an event, whether it is district-wide or whether it is isolated to a particular campus, if something occurs, whether it is weather or whether it is extreme illness. I mean, if you had a dramatic flu outbreak many years ago, we had a situation where several schools had that many years ago, and we filed for waivers for several of them, or some sort of a security incident. We can ask the state to exclude that day from our calculation of average daily attendance so that it does not hurt our funding. And they just kick that day out.
And I know that. I wonder, students now missing a day, is that a little more valuable
No,
than what they did in the past because we have fewer
and I'm
days?
going to look at, it doesn't, did I?
Because the denominator changes too.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, there you go. That's a good way to think about it. Ms. Powell, I don't want to really get a deep dive into this, but when we start talking, we had that little W in front of ADA for WADA. What's our cost loss on, let's just use the best example of WADA. There's a lot of things that are calculated in there. When we get into special ed, what is the state, and I'm not asking for that exact number right now, and I don't expect y'all to have that number. I would like to see, if possible, that number of the WADA, what we're spending on special ed students or some of our English language, or any of those things that calculate for WADA, and what we're actually receiving funding for some of those weights that we're getting.
I can tell you, without being very specific about it, that we, in all but the career tech program, we dramatically spend more than the
course.
revenue we get because it takes us more to deliver the program
course.
that the state requires us to deliver. And that is certainly the case with special ed. Career Tech, we had been trying to stay inside the allotment. As our programs have grown and our offerings have grown, I think we're now spending more than that allotment even. But so just in general, we spend more than all these allotments.
And I don't want to put, if it's easy to pull, I'd like to see that number. If not, I'd like to see what the state funds us versus what we spend on those.
Yes.
Because it is something you have to educate legislators. As we met with some of our legislators, we quickly find out, and no, I don't defend them much, but I will defend them. I understand how much we work on this constantly, and I have colleagues, or most of my colleagues up here have pretty good knowledge. I have colleagues around the state who have no concept over school finance. So I think we have to educate. We have to do a good job of explaining.
We actually include that on our unfunded mandates list. That's that difference between what we spend on the programs and what we receive in funding.
And that's included in our 83 million or so that we have for unfunded mandates. That's helpful. Thank you. Let me ask Ms. Powell, just for this presentation, I think as we go in the future, I think showing all the Tarrant County tax rates from all the local districts, is I think we're 4th or 5th is where we are in ranking of Tarrant County of a low tax rate, I think is an important factor to show where we're going. On charter funding, that money's taken on the average across the state, and some of our smaller districts, rural districts, receive extra funding, correct?
And that's what drives that up. You're exactly right. And our smallest districts get, one of the adjustments made to the basic allotment for them is a small district adjustment. And so those adjustments are factored in, and that becomes part of the basic allotments. We have numerous small districts across the state.
And they start to add, there's a lot of rural area in Texas.
Yeah, and so that drives up that average cost that is used to fund the charters.
And in those rural areas, would you say that's the only school in town?
Yes.
Yes. And I use the word town facetiously. Some of them don't really have towns in there. So with that funding numbers, if we calculate 62,000 students at 900, we're talking around $55 million additional revenue. If we were a charter, is what we'd be receiving?
Yes.
Thank you. Just wanted to check on that. About 55 million, Ms. Walton. Do you need me to say it again? 55,000,000. Checking to make sure I got enough zeros in there for million. I had to double check on that one from where it's coming. Thank you, Ms. Powell. As you mentioned, we are, in the past, we did, I think staff told me a little earlier, we did it in 2012, 2011, right around there, did a school finance video. We actually sold it to other districts, and other districts started utilizing it. I know we're working to bring that back. As chair of governance, who oversees legislative, we are meeting with legislators coming up to help educate just them and their staff, letting them have a safe place where they can come in and learn without any judgment. It's a safe room for them that help them hopefully understand school finance. And we'll also be holding these in the public, as you said earlier, to help the public understands. Ms. Powell, I thank you for guiding us through school finance. I thank all of my colleagues for listening and all of us working on this, because it's a constant battle. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hogg. Mrs. Hudson.
Thank you, President Reich. I want to thank Ms. Walton and Mr. Hogg for bringing up the transportation, because that was one of my questions as well. We provide a tremendous amount of opportunity in this district, but your opportunity is only as good as your access to it. And if you can't get a ride to that wonderful opportunity, then it's not doing you any good. So the waiting on that funding is just egregious. Can you tell me a little bit more about the INS flexibility? The flexibility on that INS rate?
Yes, in terms of the slide that we had in here, okay. So Your INS rate is the rate that generates taxes to pay back bonded debt, so the principal and interest on your bonds. And so when we create a bond package, we estimate what we think property values are going to do over time, and then each year we know what the principal and interest payments are for that upcoming year. And so the board adopts a tax rate that just exactly raises enough money to pay that year's principal and interest. What we anticipate is that based on the trends in our property value growth, that we could do a tax rate swap where we actually lower that INS rate, and because our values have gone up enough, we are able to generate the dollars we need to pay that upcoming year's principal and interest, maybe with a lesser rate than what we originally thought when we first created the bond package, if that makes sense. Then you can swap that rate, is essentially, it's just kind of semantics there, but then you lower that INS rate, and then through a TRE, you can raise your M&O rate. You still keep the two rates together, added together for your total rate. It doesn't change. It just is maybe you're taxing more in your M&O rate, taxing less on that INS side. Still making sure that that we have the capacity with our future anticipated property value growth that we could continue funding debt, potentially new debt even, with that INS rate.
Okay. I just thought it important to emphasize that we do have the flexibility in that INS rate. And I believe during the time that I've served on the board, we have been able to drop that based on the interest rates that we were getting back. We didn't need to charge as much in one year as we did the previous year. We couldn't necessarily call it a reduction in taxes because property taxes or property values went up. And so therefore your effective tax rate didn't go down, but we were able to lower the tax rate. Am I saying that right?
You are, and,
Okay.
and a lot of that ability was more about the fact that property values themselves grew more so than, it's a combination of things. So property values grow when we sell bonds. We've been fortunate the last few years. We've gotten better interest rates on those bonds than we first anticipated when we modeled the entire bond package and what the debt would look like on that. And so it's that as well, and it's interest earnings on the dollars while we have them. So kind of a combination of a lot of things, but we have been fortunate that we've been able to drop that tax rate a little bit in each of the last couple of years because mainly because property values have continued to grow.
And just by contrast, our M&O, we do not have the same flexibility. So for instance, if our costs were projected to be lower next year, we could not lower our M&O rate and then raise it back up as needed to cover cost. We would then, if we lowered it, have to go back to the voters and ask for it to be raised again. Is that correct?
Well, right now we tax at $1.04. We could choose to lower that tax rate, and then you could choose to raise it back to $1.04 without having a vote. Anything above $1.04,
Anything above that, okay.
you have to have a vote.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. AISD yield, you made me curious. So since it's based on a particular district, is there a lot of fluctuation in that?
And I'm sorry, which?
The tier 2.
Tier 2, okay.
It's based on Austin ISD.
Austin's property values are growing probably faster than ours. And so as that goes up from one year to the next, that guaranteed yield goes up a little bit. It generates some extra money for us one year to the next, but it's not millions and millions.
And if that changed, that would also change, right? If their property values slowed down or stayed stagnant, then so would our tier 2 funding.
Yes, or it would, if their values just stayed flat, then that guaranteed yield would stay flat, and we wouldn't necessarily lose money, but we wouldn't generate extra money from one year to the next.
Okay. And then finally, I don't think this is an answer that you'll have for me today, but I am curious if the information is out there, what the difference is between statewide enrollments versus the state's calculated ADA. So if you took all of Texas and said,
Yeah,
here's the number of
that's
students
us.
that we have enrolled, but here's our calculated ADA, what's that difference?
Yeah, and you're right, I can't quote that, but that's easy to get. We'll get that for you.
I appreciate it. And thank you so much for all the hard work. I join my colleagues in enthusiastic support for sharing this with our legislators and with our community. It's really going to take all of us being knowledgeable and then putting pressure on our legislators before we're going to see a change. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Hudson. Mr. Hibbs.
There we go. Thank you. I keep on turning myself off. Ms. Powell, you and your team are experts at this. I mean, you really are very, very good. I think I would be hard pressed to think that there are very many other financial groups within any of the school districts that match ours and have a knowledge of the school finance as well as your team does. So I appreciate that, and I appreciate you bringing it forward. I think that you could tell by the questions tonight by the former or the board members that's already spoke that our board in many ways gets this also. The questions especially that I would expect to come from a controller, Ms. Mays and Mr. Hogg, and his work for so long, and being able to speak in Austin and advocate for our district and districts across the state is tremendous. So the knowledge here is very strong. There's some things that I was picking up on that maybe even be beyond the presentation that you gave us tonight too, that I think that we need to be aware of in our education to the public, even talking to the legislator contingency that we have here in North Texas. We probably really need to focus on. One's been mentioned with the buses and transportation. That in itself is an easy fix. I mean, if you think about it, the rate hasn't been changed since 1984, and you can see that energy costs has gone through the roof during that time frame. And we've had at least two of our elected officials reach out to us and say that I would like to advocate for that. We haven't seen anything happen there, but it would be one that I think that we could share, we get this amount and this is what it actually costs for us to do it. And that's a span of almost $8 billion. I mean, that in itself is a huge difference. Another thing that you see is the unfunded mandates. Mm-hmm. We're looking at budget deficits over the next few years. And if you look at what we have in some of our projections, I mean, 18, 25, 31. Unfunded mandates are $67 million.
They're actually more than that. They're like 83 million.
83 million, that's exactly. And I know the legislature would say, hey, we took that down just a little bit this last year, but 83 million, that could cover up a lot of deficits that we have for many years to come if they were just funding what they were mandating. And one of those mandates is that we ensure that we have transportation for our students, and that transportation can come for homeless students. It could be anyone that's within outside of that 2-mile radius. There's a lot of different things there. So unfunded mandates is something that we have to make sure that we educate the public into, that they have an understanding that Austin is putting these things on us and saying, you go find the money. It's like the governor saying, I want to make sure that everybody gets extra $1,000 raise this year, but the state, the school districts have to find the money for it. When we look at the TRE, our district has been very, very conservative. I mean, we've said that, we've maintained this $1.04 for a very long time, and we push through without moving towards saying that we're going to try to look at that higher percentage that we potentially could get up to $1.17. And that's not a guarantee, because you have to go out and get the voters educated enough to understand why you're doing that. And from that standpoint, I've heard some different legislators go and say, well, you have the opportunity to still raise yours. Well, at the very same time, they're saying that each property tax should stay low. So it's kind of like they're talking to you from this hand to this hand. With that, there does become a cap. And you showed in your slide that 36% of the districts have already hit that 117. What that's going to tell you is that unless districts are having some type of growth in enrollment, or there's some type of finance restructuring, these districts are going to be at a point of finding it very difficult to do any type of funding of salary adjustments, of being able to do any type of funding of ordinary operating budget or reoccurring costs, because those things are continually going up. So, you could, I think Ms. Walton asked, are we in jeopardy of seeing anything that's happening in some of the other states with, salary, their salary within the education rates, that people are going to start pushing back. They will when districts are having to make the hard choices that they cannot fund any type of raises, because that's what we're going to get to. There's a lot of districts, 36% of these, that are probably going to be looking towards that just this year. The last thing I wanted to bring up is that many people will ask about when it comes to property taxes, and a district will bring forward a bond. And, should you not be spending those bond dollars on salaries? Well, you can't do that.
That's correct.
There's a reason that you have a bond, is that it doesn't take away from your operating budget. What you're doing with that bond is you're financing those one-time costs, not reoccurring costs, but those one-time costs in your building or your transportation, purchases of new buses and those type of things. And this board has been very straightforward with the public in identifying what those costs are for, the bond, and that bond makes up in those dollars. By being able to have the advantage of using a bond that continues to allow your operating budget dollars to be used in a manner that you can continue your funding for your teachers, educational costs, your overhead of whether it be electricity or whatever else, those all things add to it. So those are just some things that I would say we want to ensure that we're educating the public as we go out, is just beyond how the finance structure is, that the other ancillary items, the unfunded mandates, what is a true meaning of a tax ratification election, and then also how bonds actually serve a district and how they can't serve a district in the funding. So just some added thoughts that I wanted to bring to that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hibbs. So I have just a couple of comments and I guess questions. So it would not be uncommon for an average taxpayer that isn't trying to understand all of this or doesn't have the exposure that we do, I should say, in all of this. And they may say, so you've got this $1.04 rate and the values are going up, and because the values go up, we have lower funding. I kind of get that, so what happens if we drop it from $1.04? Doesn't that save us any dollars? What would you say to that?
Well, the state aid side is based on your property values, not your tax rate or not your tax collections, this piece of it, that tier one, that local share piece. They look at last year's values. If we choose to lower our tax rate, that doesn't change our values. So the tax rate would bring in less revenue, less tax dollars, and then the state, because our values are still high, is going to further reduce our state aid. So you're right, it's complicated to explain, but that state aid piece, that adjustment in there that's called local share is based on values. So lowering our tax rate actually hurts us on both sides.
Right.
You know, you'll
Right.
wind up losing state dollars and the opportunity to generate more local tax revenue.
Right. And I bring that up specifically because that's something that we should probably have included in talking points, because it's pretty common for people to think that if they can grasp the basic understanding that it's this inverse relationship, well, then let's just lower ours, and then theirs has to come up. And that's an automatic default, and I've heard it several times, and I've had to explain just what you said to people. So I would encourage that we include that in going forward. On the projected deficits that you had up there, are those the primary drivers of the increasing deficit that you use as factors? Would the rise in values, property values, be one of those?
Yes.
Okay. Would a decline in enrollment be one of those?
It is to a degree. We also, though, we are very careful in how we staff, and we have staffing formulas, and we stick to those very carefully. So if we anticipate that our enrollment is going to go up, we know we probably have to add teachers, and we have an estimate of the number. Likewise, if we project that our enrollment is going down, we adjust our staffing count, mainly on teachers, TAs, to right-size our staff, if you will, to fit that enrollment. And that enrollment is what's driving our state aid. So we try to be careful with that, too, on that piece of it. That's something that Mr. Kale and his staff do a good job of, and I think we've really tightened that piece up over the last few years. So,
Sure.
yeah.
So what would you say to attribute the rising deficits projections would be the biggest assumptions or the largest percentage of the assumption that would be the largest percentage to causing that deficit?
It's inflation in large part, everything from contracted maintenance cost, materials cost, that sort of thing. Things that we know that we're bringing online, whether it's a new fine arts center or athletics complex, and we knew that from the start that we would incur some additional operating cost for those programs. And so those are probably the biggest pieces aside. Like you said, we don't factor raises into the calculation.
Right.
So those are probably the biggest things
Sure.
outside of that.
Well, and I think I bring it up just because those would be additional talking points to include on a fact sheet, so that those that say, well, yeah, you had this bond, you pulled the wool over our eyes, we knew there was going to be extra costs. Well, so did we. And we put that out there when we educated the public in many, many presentations on bond, and that it wasn't going to have an overall hit, but we knew what those projections were, and we explained those then, but people may forget that. And so that would be something to include, to bring up, because whether it's our local citizens or our local delegation here, there's some that absolutely feel that every time there's a bond, well, you're on a spending spree, and we're not.
And one thing that we've done a good job of along the way, and it's something we all have to continue to work on, are looking for those opportunities for efficiencies. And we've had some pretty significant ones. When we passed the bond election, one of the things we did was we combined several junior highs. We had the Hutch kids combined with Workman. Also, the Ferguson, Owsley kids combined at one school. And so we look for places where we have those opportunities. And that's something that going forward, we have to look, and not necessarily consolidating schools, but constantly looking for those opportunities. No, I know, please don't get everybody excited. But, whether it's making appropriate adjustments on staffing ratios to recognize, like we did last year, just to recognize the fact that at our high schools, not every student is in front of an AISD teacher every period. Some kids may be in a dual credit class, and so when they're in dual credit, they're being taught by a TCC instructor. So we found, we could tighten that ratio up just a tick, that calculation, so that we took that into account. Some kids are late arrival, early dismissal because they already have all their credits. And so maybe that first and last period, they're not necessarily with a teacher. And so again, just, looking for those opportunities to tighten things up. We have purchased and signed electricity contracts for out into the future. We've signed a contract already that takes effect, I think it's January 2020, that will carry us out 3 years? To the middle of 2024 at a reduced rate from what we're paying now. So we constantly seek those opportunities to tighten our efficiencies up because we know we have to.
Right. Once again, how to articulate that, maybe an addendum to talking points, that here's, because that's the sound bites that we see in re-election campaigns, and that's the sound bites that we see actively during session by some legislators, that there's the districts by and large are inefficient. We would love, we're going to give teachers another $1,000, but the districts are going to figure that out because they're going to become more efficient, and that the general rule to them that they're putting out there is that we're not. So if there's without getting too complex, to be able to show some of those line items that we are very efficient, because we are. You guys do an amazing job with that. Just to show them, maybe there's some that don't. I'm not going to speak for others at all, whether they do or not. I know what happens here at this district. Been around long enough to see what you guys do in managing the budget. So I think showing that efficiency and forethought is very important to plant those seeds as well. I do have a question on this slide that's been up here. With the districts that are below $1.04, why are they below $1.04?
Many of them were taxing, probably most of them, all of them were taxing below $1.50 when the new system went into place in 2007.
Okay.
That new system required that everybody lower their rate by 1/3. And so the vast majority of districts, including us, were taxing at $1.50. So when you lowered it by 1/3, you lowered it to $1. And then you had the option to go up to as high as $1.04. Right. Most districts did that. There were some districts that, because of their own circumstances, I think they generally are smaller districts, with their property values, had been taxing at an amount less than $1.50 to begin with. So they likewise had to reduce their tax rate by 1/3. And so they still are taxing below $1.04.
Interesting. And the final thing that perhaps could be included in talking points, Mr. Hogg mentioned, and we heard a little discussion on charters and the dollar amount that they get which includes the basic allotment plus for the smaller districts. That brings that up to that dollar amount. So with that, I would presume that the argument for that dollar amount is that charters don't have the same mechanisms that we do to go out for bonds, for facilities, and those types of things. And overall, the percentage is really, really small on the state budget because there's not that many charters. So yes, they get more, but it's kind of more fair, just like these small districts. So what would you say to that, and how could we include that in talking points to educate our legislators that that's still not fair and equitable?
Well, that's a good question. I'll probably have to think about that for a bit. But it is true. I mean, we have no good, simple options available to us, and we're bound to voter approval of a TRE in order to raise our tax rate at all. The charters have proven to not be very efficient just in the way that they operate, just from the very perspective that most of them are small and they have their own superintendent, their own administrative staffs that drive up administrative overhead. And so I think that basically the state is running two public school systems. And one has a lot more flexibility to it in terms of just their mandates and the way that they operate. And then they have access to ready dollars that other districts, public school districts like us, are bound by more legislative requirements and more mandates, and yet we don't even have access to the revenue streams to support that as easily. So I'd have to probably give that a little more thought, but you know, they have proven to not be efficient. And so the state really, when they talk about wanting districts to be more efficient and wanting to just improve the overall efficiency of public ed funding, they've created a system that by its very nature is not efficient. And so I think that's costing taxpayers in total across the state.
Yeah, yeah. Well, very good. I appreciate that, and I would look forward to what your thoughts are, because I just, that's one of those things that I can hear our legislators that are so pro, let's do something different, whether it's vouchers, ESAs, et cetera, with charter expansion. That's, I would think that's what they're going to use as a counter. And so we need to be prepared up front to say, well, but it's actually like this, inefficiencies plus. So amazing, great information. Thank you so much for taking the time and putting this together. I appreciate you, my colleagues, for the statements. I'm in complete agreement with everything that has been said. The line of questioning, it's going to be an uphill battle from a finance standpoint for certain, but the opportunities to offer some guidance and education for especially our elected officials, but then also our community is absolutely beneficial, I think, in the long run for us. So thank you very much, and I don't see any other lights indicating other questions, so we'll let you take a seat. Thank you very much. All right, so that takes us to the open forum for non-agenda items, and we do have a card, but I believe that individual has left, so I think I don't see any other cards, so we will move on. Next would be the superintendent's report. Dr. Cavazos.
Thank you, President Reich, and I'd like to share some information about our district, and this is a little longer than usual, but I think it's important. It's a lot going on this time of year. I want to take an opportunity to thank our school librarians, and you're going to see a picture of them here. April was School Librarian Month, and their librarians are dedicated professionals who support our students and teachers every day, and they provide a great environment for literacy every day. And so thank you to our librarians and some representatives there for all that they do. Next, we honored our Campus Teachers of the Year with a dinner and a banquet on April 10th. And congratulations to all those teachers, and thank you for making sure our students are prepared for their future and for being such outstanding representatives of all our teachers in the district. Our AISD Foundation, Education Foundation, hosted AISD Education Celebration in mid-April with that private party at Six Flags Over Texas. The event continues to grow in popularity and also revenue generating for the foundation. And then they turn around and provide grants for our teachers. And so it's a win-win for everyone. Thank you once again, as we thank them often, to our wonderful Education Foundation here in Arlington. Entrepreneurship Day 2018 was a big success, with many of our AISD students being recognized for their outstanding creative and ingenious kind of ideas. And here's an example of a scholarship winner. This was a great event that really our students get to shine in non-traditional ways in terms of innovation. Both West and Venture schools had big anniversary celebrations in April. West Elementary celebrated 20 years with food trucks and musical performances. Venture, believe it or not, celebrated 30 years of existence with a reception and a special song by former principal John DeMore, as he sang a school song that he wrote, and made kind of the event really special by doing that. So both wonderful events. Thank you to the leadership at both schools, because it takes a lot to plan these events and to actually celebrate in a great way. AISD Parent and Community Engagement Department and the Dan Diaper Career Tech Center hosted a business practicum luncheon to thank our local businesses that have internships in our school district or provide internships for our students. Special thank you to Carrie Winter, our AISD practicum specialist, for working so hard to make sure that our students have internship opportunities that are really outstanding. Congratulations to Natasha Harris, Assistant Principal at Hale Elementary, for being named Regional Assistant Principal of the Year for Region 11. This is a peer-based award and recognizes APs for their commitment to students as evidenced by their leadership. And so, Natasha, congratulations and a great job on everything that she does. Media Fair 2018 was last Thursday. We had students of all ages, more than 35 campuses recognized for their technology and media integration, and they showed how using technology can really improve teaching and learning. Congratulations to Haley, and you see her there from Shackleford Junior High, for winning Best of Show for her animation project. So Haley, congratulations. Last weekend was an AISD Pre-K Academy for all our pre-K instructors in the district. Some of the funding was by the Education Foundation, again, through a large grant that they provided. Make sure that it was better than ever. In addition to breakout sessions, the Academy attendees were treated to a keynote address from Sesame Street star Sonia Manzano. If you remember Sonia, you remember Sesame Street really well. Thank you to our foundation for presenting this important event once again. I'd like to congratulate April 2018 Teachers and Department Employees of the Month, Gabby Reilly from Goodman Elementary, Rachel Nielsen from SHAC, Claudia Moya from Venture High School, and Gaya Jefferson from Academic Services. These are outstanding employees, and every time we go to present these Teacher of the Month and Employee of the Month, it's just really, really special. And you never know what they're going to say. And we're on Facebook Live, and so the whole world knows what they say. But they always have good comments. So yesterday we had an opportunity a very important opportunity to train and calibrate with our secondary principals and have a tabletop exercise with Arlington Police Department. The group went over emergency situations and best practices to ensure the safety of our students. APD did an outstanding job. They had a great instructor and leader. So Lieutenant Stevens actually is here in the audience, and he led the session. So thank you for your partnership with us. This helps us calibrate on situations and examples and helps us discuss them through as we deal with scenarios. So thank you, Lieutenant Stevens, and everyone involved with that. Finally, we could do an entire report on our draft events, so I'm just going to kind of go through a summary. But AISD partnered with the NFL and the Dallas Cowboys to have really a community experience focused on our students while the draft was here in Arlington. And so, thanks to the Dallas Cowboys, the Gene and Jerry Jones Foundation, and the NFL, our students were spotlighted and treated really through this wonderful draft experience and mentored and encouraged. I'll go down a couple or a few. NFL Play 60 invited elementary schools to participate in football drills, running, blocking, coaching, and catching at AT&T Stadium. Students at Workman Junior High competed with the NFL Character Playbook at the stadium, where they were partnered with draft picks to compete against other schools in the character education. More than 125 of our junior high students competed in the Play 60 football clinic with the draft prospects at AT&T Stadium. Arlington High School students sang the national anthem for that event. 7th grade students, art students, painted helmets for a contest that was put on by the Dallas Cowboys, and you see the helmets there. Helmets were then displayed in the draft experience, in the war room, if you will, in Dallas Cowboys. Carter Junior High art students announced the Cowboys' 6th-round draft pick, and the helmets were auctioned off, and the money's going back to the Fine Arts Department. Just outstanding. All 6 of our high school football teams completed the quarterback challenge and did community service projects after receiving $3,000 grant, each one of those. 2 players from each of the high school football teams were on stage with NFL Commissioner Roger Goodell, and Cowboys when they made their 1st-round pick, Cowboys did. They also got to walk the red carpet earlier that day, and they were part of the pit celebration there by the stage, which was outstanding for our students and our football players. And then finally, the announcement that last Wednesday, where the Dallas Cowboys, the Gene and Jerry Jones Youth Foundation, and the NFL announced that AISD would receive a $1.85 million legacy project donation to upgrade the field, install turf, provide lighting, and a scoreboard for a district-wide competitive field at Workman Junior High. So thank you again to the Dallas Cowboys, the Jones family, for their partnership and really stepping up to the challenge as we challenge them to make this draft experience a community experience that includes students and really Arlington, the Arlington community through AISD. So that concludes my report.
Thank you, Dr. Cavazos. And yeah, there's been a lot of things going on. We've been a lot of places in the past few weeks, that's for sure. Are there any trustees with reports? Mrs. Walton.
I just want to add one thing. I visited the media fair, and it was fabulous. Guys, we're going to have to find a bigger place to hold it. It was packed. They had pulled every chair in there. It was packed to out the door. So we're going to have to find a bigger place to have it.
Very good. Any other trustees with reports? Seeing none, I have just a couple of things to mention to the group. First off, I had the privilege and the honor to attend with Dr. Cavazos and several of the lead team that is involved in the Holdsworth process. They had a celebratory dinner to commemorate 1 year, 1 year in for the first cohort, and a very special moment. Culmination of a lot of time and energy investment for leadership development, and it was my definite honor and privilege to be able to be there on behalf of the board and see the other districts, champion districts in there. But of course, we have the best one. They're doing great work, as we all know. So, just wanted to put that out there that continues to evolve over the next 4 years more with Holdsworth. Great opportunity. And then one more thing to let everybody know that related to safety and security, we are in the very beginning phases of exploring some more coordination and calibration with our county. Dr. Cavazos and I, Mr. Hill, met with Sheriff Wayborn and Commissioner Andy Wynn at his office so that we can really talk more on coordination for social and emotional well-being and health and some counseling services and other things that we can do for our student body population, as well as discuss a little bit on threat assessment and how we have such a great opportunity, or we're already great recipients of what we have with our Arlington Police Department. There's going to be next steps, which will be high level with bringing in maybe JPS, MHMR, and other organizations around the table so that we can coordinate together what we can do and have communication protocols streamlined and agreements in place for what we can do here in our resource ability as a district, but what the county can do in different organizations as well, so that we can help our students and ultimately increase the safety of our entire district, our students and our faculty as well. So that, just to let everybody know that's coming down the road. We will be discussing legislative priorities around that, funding, pilot project, et cetera. So that's going to be a long time coming, but we're planting the seeds of that calibration and coordination, which is very, very important, and it will have a powerful impact for our students. So I just wanted to let my colleagues know that. With that, I don't see any other lights for reports. Madam Secretary, do we have items to consider?
Yes, we do, President Reich. Bowie's request was to see the dollar numbers of WADA and what we are spending and what we are receiving. Polly requested to see local school tax rates in all of Tarrant County. Yeah, Bowie. Yeah, I'm going to give it to you, Polly. Kristen, Kristen, yes, to show all the local school tax rates in Tarrant County. And Kristen requested to get the difference between ADA and student enrollment.
Very good. All right, thank you, Madam Secretary. It is 9:37 p.m. We are not going into closed session. This meeting's adjourned.